Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to our second edition of Breaking News for this Monday, the 6th day of May, 2024. And it's sure a good idea that we had earlier about doing a second breaking news because so much has happened since we talked to you about 7 hours ago. All right, here's the latest. Once we finished this morning about 6 a.m. Pacific time, a bunch of stories came out about how it looked like it was all over. Any negotiations between Hamas and Israel had just gone kaput. It just seemed that was it. And there's all these stories about Israel now going into Rafah and getting ready. They'd moved like 100,000 or in the process moving 100,000 civilians out of the way so they could start the military, incursion. Then all of a sudden, boom, we get a story. Hamas tells Egypt and Qatar it accepts their ceasefire terms. That's our first headline. That came tonight, Israeli time. Let's read it. As civilians begin to evacuate Rafah ahead of an Israeli ground operation, political head of the terrorist group Ismail Haniyeh tells mediators he's agreed to the proposed ceasefire terms. Senior Israeli officials said a unilateral proposal without Israeli involvement, an exercise by Hamas designed to present Israel as a refusenik. In other words, Israel was not involved in this decision at all. Hamas announced Monday it had accepted this Egyptian Qatar proposal for a ceasefire to halt a 7-month-long war with Israel in Gaza after Israel had ordered 100,000 Palestinians to begin evacuating from the southern city of Rafah, signaling that a long-promised ground invasion there could be imminent. As Hamas officials said, we agreed to a 6-week ceasefire. So there's going to be a 6-week ceasefire, according to Hamas. A senior Israeli official called the so-called deal a unilateral proposal without Israeli involvement. This is not the proposal we discussed with the Egyptians. This is an exercise by Hamas designed to present Israel as a refusenik, as we said earlier. In other words, this is not Israel's agreement. This agreement between Hamas, Egypt, Qatar, and maybe the United States too, but they said they agreed to it. All right, so it looks like another dead end. Here comes the however. All right, the U.S. now says it's studying Hamas's response on the Gaza ceasefire and will discuss it with its allies. Like the U.S. and its allies have the last word or something. It's studying the response to discuss with its allies in the Middle East in the coming hours. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller told reporters on Monday, I can confirm that Hamas has issued a response. We are reviewing that response now and discussing it with our partners in the region. Miller said on Monday afternoon, confirming that a response was received and that discussions would take place in the coming hours. CIA Director Bill Burns is in the region working on this in real time, he said. This is a Reuters story, and Bill Burns is the man we mentioned yesterday that supposedly made an agreement with Hamas and said, look, you do a ceasefire and we'll make sure that's it. All hostilities will cease at the end of the ceasefire. Israel will, return to finish the job in Gaza. And supposedly that was a deal that they made. Well, we'll see if that is true or not. But anyway, so you got Israel, saying, well, we weren't any part of this. And the U.S. is now discussing with its allies in the Middle East and looking at it. So that's what they're at. So the U.S., said it's studying the response and waiting to see, what we think of it. Well, this next story is from Virtual Jerusalem. This is 7:17 Israeli time, and here's what they say. Israel answers deceptive Hamas answer with IDF tanks, bombs, and ground forces entering Rafah. Despite the supposed acceptance by Hamas of a ceasefire agreement, Israel isn't buying it. Defying warnings by Biden and other U.S. officials, IDF forces are at this moment entering the Rafah area, with Arab media reporting that the Israeli Air Force is heavily bombing the Rafah area. The IDF confirms that tanks and armored personnel carriers are crossing from Israel into southern Gaza en masse. Israeli sources have reported that what Hamas agreed to was not the proposal that Israel agreed to in principle. Rather, it appears that Hamas received final assurance from CIA Director William Burns to the effect that the United States would not allow Israel to continue the war. So we talked about yesterday. Israel Prime Minister spoke with President Joe Biden, but Biden's threats evidently did not change his determination to do what needs to be done. Israel believes that the United States has taken the side of Hamas in preventing Israel from completing its war aims. The Israeli cabinet is meeting now to discuss the situation. The IDF has confirmed that the ground operation in Rafah has begun. Now, that seems to be where we're at now. And it seems, we keep saying it seems, because everything seems to change momentarily, moment by moment in the Middle East, that Israel is going to go into the ground operation. This is not what they agreed to. part of this agreement that Hamas made with itself, it seems, is that there's a time when the war must end. In other words, a definite end without getting rid of Hamas, without getting rid of their leaders, without getting rid of the terrorists who were behind the October 7th massacre, et cetera, et cetera. And that is not what Israel has agreed to. It's not what Israel wants. It's not what the people of Israel need to do. And so that's where we're at right now, as it's nighttime in Israel. After what time is it here? It's 11:13 in Israel, 1:13 here on the West Coast. They're 10 hours ahead. So we're done for the night there. And in the morning, we'll hear some more things. But this is where we're at. Now, if they go forward with it, and this is where it was earlier today, we had Hamas promising consequences for the Rafah evacuation. This is early this morning, our time. A Hamas official told Reuters that the evacuation of Rafah is a dangerous process which will have consequences. And then you had this story, which made me so mad, and I'm sure it'll make you mad. It said, U.S. demands clarifications from Israel on the Rafah operation. In other words, not ask, they demand the clarifications. What are you going to do? Well, the Biden administration demands answers as IDF begins preparations for evacuation of civilians from parts of Rafah ahead of the operation. Now, this was early this morning, our time, and later in the afternoon, Israeli time, before Hamas's announcement. Biden talked to Netanyahu for a half hour on the phone. Remember what we've said, both Blinken and Biden have warned and have threatened Israel. If they go ahead, they're not only going to say we're not going to be any part of this, they're also going to possibly bring some sanctions against Israel and look again at the relationship. This is from Biden himself, so we will see. Now, remember we said yesterday that some of the ammunition that was sent or supposed to be sent to Israel has not got there. Here's our next headline. Half of all IDF ammunition in war comes to the United States. So half of the ammunition they will use in this war comes from the U.S. This is the annual Defense Ministry report. So Israel is specifically dependent upon American military aid, which it has spent billions throughout the ongoing war, while long-term contracts ensure continued reliance. In other words, they have a long-term contract that they will continue to get this military ordnance to fight the war. And so that's where we're at right now. And recall what we talked about yesterday, that there is an agreement to ship certain military assets to Israel, and that's on hold right now. They've withheld the ammunition, the rockets, whatever Israel needs, that they were supposed to send. And so that's kind of where we're at right now. So what we're going to do, we're going to leave that for now today because it's very confusing, but we can sum up simply by saying Hamas late in the day says, okay, we will do a ceasefire. But then Israel said, wait a minute, based on what? Based on some agreement you have with Qatar and Egypt and maybe the United States? We're not involved in this. And evidently this agreement called for a definite end to the war at some specific time, which Israel has never agreed to and won't agree to. So anyway, that's where we're at. Now, what's really interesting now, we're going to leave this because we have a story that came out today that specifically confirms what the Bible predicts about the last day. So this is our takeaway from our second breaking news of the day. In our book, 25 Signs We're Near the End. Now, this is from our website, Educating Our World. It's a free download. 25 Signs We're Near the End, one of 12 books that we have on Bible prophecy, books on 11 different subjects, all for free download. And so please take advantage of them, over 350 videos. The reason we keep saying this is we got so many people adding to our subscribers every day. In the last 3 weeks, or excuse me, the last 5 weeks, we've had about 3,000 more subscribers to our website, to our YouTube page. You don't have to subscribe to our website. So we've been getting all kinds of people today coming on, a bunch of new people today. So we have to explain over and over again. You go to Educating Our World, everything's free, particularly the book 25 Signs We're Near the End. Now, sign number 9, here's what we're interested in right now. The predicted invasion of Israel in the last days, Ezekiel 38 and 39. And what we talk about there, a number of nations are specifically mentioned when we look at the boundaries of the ancient world and we put it with the modern nations. These are the nations that will coalesce together under Russian leadership and invade Israel in the last days. Russia will take the lead, of course. Iran will be subservient. They will not run the show like they're doing now. Iran is Persia. Russia is Rosh there in Ezekiel. Turkey, it's in the Hebrew there, it's Gomer and Beth Togarmah. That's in the area of modern day Turkey. Then Put, which is modern day Libya, and Cush, which is modern day Sudan. These nations will be part of a coalition that will invade Israel in the last days. So here is a headline that we have. This is from Gatestone Institute. Headline number 7 today: Iran's dangerous new terror proxy, Sudan. You can't make this stuff up. Iran's encirclement of Israel, control of the Red Sea is almost complete. What makes this the future in this case darker is Sudan's history of hosting extremists and jihadists from the far right and the far left. During the previous regime, Sudan hosted Osama bin Laden, leader of Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Carlos the Jackal. This warm embrace of violent extremists earned Sudan a spot on the list of state-sponsored terrorism. That's from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, January 31st, 2024. The bottom line for America and Europe is that the strategy of engaging and appeasing Iran has failed miserably. The U.S. and Europe must step up now to counter Iran's efforts in the Middle East and Sudan. We cannot allow the new proxies of terror for Iran. So what we have here, Sudan has joined the list that's helping out Iran right now in surrounding Israel and attempting to destroy the nation once and for all. But we know from Scripture what's going to take place. It's not going to be Iran leading this coalition. It's going to be Russia. Iran will be subservient to Russia because it's going to be a much larger coalition than this. But what's interesting, and this is the key, which we've been talking about, they're almost surrounded now. Libya will come into the picture. Libya is not a player right now. They're called put in the Hebrew there in Ezekiel 38. They're going to be part of the last days coalition, maybe in Algeria and Morocco, that territory next to Libya. But the point is, not everybody's lined up yet. But what we do see are these nations, again, working with Iran. Again, you've got Turkey doing it to some degree, but Russia is basically in charge of everything there. And Russia is bogged down, of course, in the Ukraine. They don't have anything to do, trust me, with what's going on in right now. Now they're supplying Iran. They're agreeing with what Iran's doing, but they're not leading the charge. And as we've said many times, according to Ezekiel 38, 39, it is a Russian leader who has this thought, who forms the coalition, who leads the coalition, who actually goes to the Holy Land as part of the coalition and gets killed in the Holy Land. So it's not an Iranian coalition, it's a Russian coalition, a Russian leader. We've talked about that, and we have that written extensively in our book, 25 Signs. And we have a separate book on the Ezekiel 38, 39 invasion, where we specifically show that Rosh, the Hebrew word Rosh, refers to a country. The leader is the Prince of Rosh. It's a genuine place that Ezekiel was talking about. And so this is where this person will come from, the leader Gog, that's his title, and they will be the leaders of this coalition. And let's face it, Russia is the only country that can pull it off. Turkey's not part of this coalition fighting now with Iran. Iran has a bunch of surrogates, but they don't have Turkey on their side. They don't have Russia on their side working with militarily. When it comes to the time of the end, not only Turkey and Russia will be there militarily, but also, like we said, Libya, which doesn't even have an army right now they can put together. So like we've always said, be careful of jumping the gun here and saying, this is Ezekiel 38, 39. It is not. It is still to come. And when it does happen, it'll be a Russian leader. It won't be Iran. They will take the lead. But what's interesting here, and for our purposes, Sudan is now joining in this terrorist coalition of nations that are surrounding Israel. So Russia will have no problem, enlisting Sudan in the last days. So let's summarize what we're at right now. Okay, we're going to wait for a response from Hamas and from Israel and what really went on. What specifically is in this agreement? Israel will probably know that. In fact, we will know that first thing in the morning since they're 10 hours ahead. Now, it's not unlikely that many other countries will encourage or even try and force Israel to take this agreement, including the U.S., but Israel cannot and will not. Very clearly, they cannot. And again, supposedly this agreement has a literal end to the war, an end game for Israel's work in Gaza and work with Hamas. And Israel says, no, our end game's our end game when we finish, when there's no more Hamas, no more military threat to us. So October 7th can never happen again. But we do have a specific story, since we saw this morning, about Sudan, which fulfills what the Lord predicted through Ezekiel over 2,600 years ago. So never a dull moment here. All right, I'm Don Stewart. We'll see you tomorrow morning again, Lord willing, with another edition of Breaking News. Until then, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.